horrible, horrible, horrible people in the world. Ooh, that's a really good case. We can talk about superheroism, you know, the validity of killing people. Some people believe, right, and this is my problem with the Batman narrative, it is currently that, like, all killing is bad. Therefore, Batman allows the Joker to live knowing that he's going to go on, and as a result, he ends up killing 300 children by bombing a school. Batman doesn't let the Joker die. He doesn't even not kill the Joker. The Joker is dying in his own, like, Batman saves his life. And that's the whole thing with, like, Jason Todd is like, no, I would kill the Joker. Obviously, he's got his, like, emotional problems and is also a little bit of a monster. Jason Todd is himself, but morally, the concept, aside from him being a little bit of a monster and Batman being kind of a nice guy, morally his concept seems to me to be more consistent with saving the lives of the most people. One of my favorite people that you should look up is you should look into the Germans who were trying to assassinate Hitler. There's that film Valkyrie starring Tom Cruise. One of the people who helped set up that plot in real life, his name was Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who is a fascinating theologian and one of those people who, you know, one of the big atrocities of World War II, right, was that the Catholic Church actually supported Hitler, which is, like, the Vatican said, you know, the beginning, just like how in the beginning the US and other countries said, oh, Hitler is not a big deal, it's gonna be fine as he mows through stuff, and then eventually it got to countries that people were like, oh, Hitler's probably a problem, we should probably do something about this, right? The whole, like, trying to pacify him and being like, it's okay, that's just his culture. No, it's not just his culture, he's an asshole to himself. So anyway, it got sorted out. Spoiler alert, Hitler lost in the end, but not before ruining and destroying many, many, many lives. And certainly the events of World War II, people like to bash Israel in the current Palestine situation, but the events of everything in Israel and Palestine can be tied directly back to the things that happened in the Holocaust. And the need to defend, people were like, that's never going to happen again. Jewish people are never going to let this happen to themselves again. They're going to arm and protect themselves. And so from the Jewish narrative of 1948, I actually have the book 1948, all about the events of that year, because I studied a little bit during my history major. But from the Jewish narrative, they were immigrants who moved into Israel to have a new life after the Holocaust, and they were then attacked even as immigrants, and defended themselves, and then ended up, doing a very good job of defending themselves and being super powerful, and owning the land then. From the Arab narrative, it's the same as, like, Americans who are afraid of, like, Mexicans coming into America. The Arab narrative is that, these immigrants are not immigrants, they're colonists and imperialists, and that their occupation, and there are two different narratives say whoever fired the first shot in 1948, it's debated, but from that narrative, they were displaced by imperialists or colonists. And when you look into it, like we in my class had to read diaries from both sides, and it was fascinating, right, to see the severity of human life and loss from these things. We had to read the side of a Israeli soldier whose parents had just come out of the Holocaust. And you read from a young Arab teenage girl who was displaced from her home. And all of those events and those things that happen, you can really tie back directly to things that happened during the Holocaust. So it's easy to bash people, but I think it's important to understand where things come from, and then the Holocaust events can also be tied to what happened during right after World War I with the awful settlement that really screwed over Germany, and created that economic situation. You can keep tracing things back, and we can keep tracing blame forever, and the question really becomes, where does the buck stop? And how do we do better moving forward? Because it's always going to be, this is somebody's fault, but certainly we are all influenced by history in the past. That's why it's so important to study history and be compassionate to people because of history. But Dietrich Bonhoeffer, had he succeeded, a lot of those things would have been prevented, I think, if they'd been able to get rid of Hitler. And he was a pastor. He was preaching, in addition to secretly plotting that you know, the church needed to stand, just like Corrie ten Boom, the ten Boom family, and other, you know, Christians who stood with Jews. That was his narrative. I don't want to say it like a Protestant versus a Catholic narrative, but it is true that the Catholic Church officially sided with Hitler, and it was a lot of more local Protestant people groups that were siding with and protecting Jewish people. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was one of those. He wasn't a person hiding Jewish people, he was one of the attempted assassins. And he is fascinating. They ended up, you know, there's a movie about him which ends horribly and like was very scarring to see the end of as a child, because it involves nudity. The death scene involves nudity. Because the Germans were just horrible. I don't want to say the Germans, but the Nazis were just particularly horrible with how they humiliated and executed people. But yeah, that's someone to look into. I think that Dietrich Bonhoeffer is a much better character than Batman. Dietrich Bonhoeffer would not have allowed the Joker to then bomb 300 children. Dietrich Bonhoeffer.